Hi, I'm Christopher Hine, and today we're going to be talking about Aikido's ground game. So what is the ground game in Aikido? What's going on with that? And that's what today's episode is going to be about. All right, so what is Aikido's ground grappling game? What's that all about? The first thing I have to say is Aikido doesn't have a ground grappling game. Almost. So there are a few points in Aikido that are on the ground and things we do need to talk about. It's not really ground grappling, and we're going to use this video to suss out exactly why it's not ground grappling. And we'll kind of talk about some little caveats that need to be added. We'll talk about some situations where Aikido's ground game is perhaps even better than Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu's ground game. And we'll also talk about a lot of times when it's not better than Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu's ground game, and how we need to kind of juggle the difference between those two, and also how we can train those things. So that's what today's episode is going to be about. I'm going to call Josh and Maya out here, and we're going to go to work. Josh, Maya? Okay, so Aikido's ground grappling game, and what is that? I would like to say first off, Aikido doesn't have a ground grappling game. If you want to learn to ground grapple, you should go to a school where they specialize in that. So go learn Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu or Western Wrestling, something where they specialize in ground grappling. Now there's two reasons for that. One reason is simply they'll have better techniques, better strategies, better tactics than Aikido will have for ground grappling because they spend all their time doing that. Second reason is they will have better staff and better people to practice with. So meaning, you know, even if your Aikido school wants to really figure out all the best techniques and tactics and strategies for ground grappling, you guys won't do it as well as someone where they've been doing that for decades, right? So go to a school where the people were raised in a lineage of ground grappling, and they've done it all the time, and everyone else there is there to practice ground grappling, and they do it dedicated as a dedicated practice. They're going to be better at ground grappling, and so that's where you should learn ground grappling. Now that doesn't mean that you have to just study ground grappling. You can then go study other martial arts too, right? So the world's a big place where we can study anything we want. So you don't have to be locked into a martial art and say, oh, this martial art has to teach me everything about life, or I will upset my sensei and have to commit seppuku or something. So it's a free world. Go study what you want. And if you want to get good at ground grappling, go to a school where they study that. Okay. Now, when I say that, Aikido doesn't have a ground grappling game. People inside the Aikido community are very likely to say, but we do. Haven't you seen the ancient pictures of Ueshiba doing ground grappling? We've seen those pictures, and just because Ueshiba did some ground grappling at one point in time doesn't mean that Aikido has ground grappling in it. What the founder did and the system that was created and the system that's been around a long time since the founder's been dead is a different thing than him himself and what he ever did possibly in the world. Okay, Aikido's ground game is very, very limited to one thing, which is pinning on the ground. And the way in which we pin on the ground in Aikido is very different than you would see in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and for a good reason. Now, if you want to just talk about this part of Aikido's ground game, it might actually be better than Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Okay, so I'm going to get Josh and Maya here. Josh, go ahead and put Maya into an Ikkyo pin facing the camera. All right, so this is a standard Ikkyo pin. This pin, if you did Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, would probably look like a weird intermediary position, and you'd be like, oh, this is not actually a very good pin from a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu standpoint. If you're an Aikido person, you might look at this and go, what's wrong with this? Why would Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu people not like this pin? What's going on with that? Okay, now first of all, without changing anything on Josh's end, we should ask, how much freedom does Maya have? So if Maya just moves around, how much freedom does she have? Okay, she's got all that kind of freedom. All right, she's got that. Could she roll over maybe? Could she get over? Okay, pretty easy for her to roll over. All right, good. All right, now, so if you study Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, you look at that and you say, man, that's a sucky pin. She has so much freedom, right? And so understand that in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, when you're trying to pin someone to the ground, you need to eliminate as much wiggle room as they have, right? So the more they can get their legs and their other arm involved to get you, the harder it's going to be for you to pin them. You want to pin them in a way that locks their core down really well so they can't resist you. And this, Josh is only holding her arm, right? So this doesn't look very good. Okay, now let's see a top mount. All right, now in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, this is top mount. It's one of the dominating positions. When I was doing tournaments, it was worth 4 points. I don't know if it's still worth 4 points, but so this is a top position. Okay, now this top position is a good position to have because the major part of Josh's weight is sitting on Maya's core, right? Maya's legs are locked out behind Josh. It's really hard for Maya to get her legs involved in Josh, right? So she could push against the ground. She might be able to nudge him forward with her legs, but really, she's probably not going to, like in a movie, whip her legs around his head and pull him down or something. That's probably not going to happen. So this is a really good pin. The only thing Josh kind of has to deal with is her arms a little bit. Arms relatively weak in this situation, so pretty good pin for Josh, okay? So if Maya were to move from this position, just move around a little bit, okay? Josh can kind of stay with her, and she's not trying too hard, and he's not trying too hard right now because they do this. And in fact, we're going to see this in just a second. Okay, so what we're going to do next, you guys can go ahead and stand up. All right, so what we're going to do next is we're going to run a simulation with these guys, and we're going to put Maya in the Ikkyo pin, and we're going to run it for 30 seconds. And we're going to see how many times Maya can escape Josh's pin from an Ikkyo position. Then we're going to have Josh get in top mount. We're going to have Maya try and escape top mount for 30 seconds, and we're going to see how many times she can get that. Now understand these two are about the same size, right? So not a big difference in size here. Josh has been doing it a little longer than Maya, but Maya's been doing it for a long time too, right? So it's not like she's way outclassed or something technically. So this is going to be a pretty fair matchup between these two. Now when you watch this, you might say, oh, but an expert and an expert. And it's like, we're not talking about the elite level guys. We're just talking about regular people who have some training in ground grappling and regular people who have some training in Aikido, and what would that look like? So let's check this scenario out. All right, so that is a comparison of those two same people doing an Ikkyo style pin and a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu style pin, which is a top mount, and how easy they are to escape from, i.e. how secure they are. So security versus autonomy is going to be one of the big things we talk about in Aikido versus Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu stuff. So when we're talking about Aikido's ground game, how did Aikido's pin look compared to Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu's? And everybody can draw their own conclusion. For me personally, the Ikkyo looks like it's not even a quarter as secure as the top mount does. The top mount looks good, so that's how that looks. Let's look at this situation, exact same drill, except both of these guys are going to, or one of these guys is going to be armed. So the person who's in the pinned position will be armed, and we'll see how that plays out from both the Ikkyo and from the top mount. Okay, so that's how both the top mount and the Ikkyo pin look when someone's armed. Now we can start to kind of think about how different that looks, right? So notice that when Maya had the knife in the top mount, she was able to usually get a couple good quick stabs in right away. So if that position was obtained without having control of the knife, so meaning the knife came out or the person doing Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu didn't know that the knife was out, then she's probably going to get that one stab. You saw that pretty consistently. Even when Josh knew that there was a knife coming at him, it's pretty hard to stop that really exciting fast action there. Okay, then we also saw what happened when Josh is controlling the arm with the knife, right? So now this is a little bit of an unfair comparison, and the problem I have in combining these drills for you guys right now is that they're two different systems and they look at things differently. So in order to have that pin, we would have to already have known there was a knife in play, or at least assumed there was a knife in play. So let's say we assumed that there was a knife in play, and so by assuming that there's a knife in play with that, we've come down and controlled that arm, and so if there was a knife, if it came from the other side, you'd be well ahead of it. If it came from this side, either it wouldn't or you would already have it under control. So it's a little bit of an unfair comparison to compare those two that way. All right, but let's see how that looks with autonomy. So autonomy, and why might autonomy be important in those two drills? So again, we're going to run the Ikkyo pin versus the top mount pin with autonomy being the issue. And autonomy just means freedom. And Aikido doesn't put a premium on security, but does put a premium on autonomy. So let's see how that looks when we play that out. Go. Go. Okay, so now we've seen a situation with the top mount versus the Ikkyo in an unarmed situation, top mount versus Ikkyo in an armed situation, and now we've seen top mount versus Ikkyo in a situation where you need to get out of the pin, right? So actually escape the pin. Now, why might that be important? Well, if the guy's got a buddy and you're holding him down and his buddy comes in, you're way more likely, I mean, you can draw your own conclusions, but from my opinion, you're way more likely to get out of there safely from an Ikkyo style pin than you are to get out from a top mount pin, right? So top mount is more secure, no doubt about it. In my mind, you guys can draw your own conclusions. You saw the drill. But in my opinion, top mount is way more secure. If I just absolutely want to hold the person down, right? So say I know I'm in numbers, right? Most people in this place are on my side, then top mount's probably going to be a good way to go as long as I'm stronger or more skilled or whatever than the guy I'm dealing with. But if I'm in a situation that's unknown, right? So he's got more friends than I got, the last thing I want to try and do is that top mount, because it's very likely his friends are going to intervene there and I'm going to be in a bad way and I can't escape the pin. Whereas with the Ikkyo, you can escape. And I think that's pretty clear from what we saw. Draw your own conclusions. But and to be fair about the top mount pin, my knee's a little messed up right now, so I'm not quite as fast as I should be to get on Josh. But you can see that I was trying my best to get him and Maya was trying her best to get in there. Okay, now let's look at one more situation. We're going to look at a couple variations for the armed grappling with Josh having the weapon. And one of those variations is going to be Josh having the weapon in his belt, but doesn't have it drawn. So he's choosing the Ikkyo pin, but he's got a weapon in his belt that he could get to, right? So this is typical law enforcement kind of situation, and more important than that for the context of Aikido, typical classical old battlefield situation where I would have a weapon in my belt and I'm holding some guy down and they start to give me trouble with that. So we're going to look at a situation like that. We're also going to look at the situation if Josh already has a weapon in his hand and Maya's holding his wrist. So she's going to be holding his wrist, which would essentially be a Gyakute Dori if they stood up, but she's going to be holding his wrist in that Ikkyo pin. And the reason that we might go to that Ikkyo pin is because she's holding my wrist and I'm trying to force her down, force her down, force her down. So what does that look like? So let's look at these two Aikido situations, both 30-second drills, and see how it looks when the person holding the pin has a weapon themselves. Good, reset. All right, guys, so that is a pretty complete package as far as I can tell to show you guys the difference between these two pins. Aikido's only ground game built into the system is pinning someone on the ground. That's its ground game. That's not much of a ground game, right? So meaning don't think in any way as an Aikido practitioner you have good ground grappling skills. Okay, now, should you get good ground grappling skills? As an Aikido student, someone just learning Aikido, I personally think it's unimportant. I'll get to why I think it's unimportant in a second. However, as a complete martial artist, absolutely you should be studying ground grappling, just like you should be studying striking arts and learning to shoot a gun. And if you want to become a complete martial artist, that's your goal, is to become a complete person who can take care of themselves and defend themselves and their family, then of course you absolutely have to study ground grappling. I've done it. I think it's good. I recommend my students do it. I have another class here at the school where we go over ground grappling. But ground grappling is its own thing, and you have to understand the strengths and limitations of ground grappling and when it's good and when it's bad. In the system of Aikido, you can see because we put a premium on weapons and we put a premium on autonomy, the ability to deal with multiple people, to get out of a situation really quick, our ground game is limited to pins that allow us to A, quickly get out of them, and B, control someone with a weapon, or also allow me to get to my weapon while controlling them. And you could see when Josh had the weapon, either it was in his belt or it was in his hand, it was effortless for him to escape that. And while there's this famous picture of Ueshiba doing ground grappling, that picture is not nearly as important as the many pictures, maybe dozens of pictures we have of him holding someone down and then holding his hand over their head like this, which is a tegatana, which just means a hand knife, which is representative of some weapon that he's holding over someone's head. And you can see when we put Josh in that position, the pin of Ikkyo was amazingly successful, right? So meaning that as long as he had that ability to hold the arm for a second while he get the knife free, Maya never got very far before she started getting loaded up with stabs. Again, that doesn't mean the fight wouldn't continue, but it gives Josh a really strong position to go from. Now, there are lots of problems when you're looking at this, and there's lots of things you can pick on because they're two different systems. So I'm doing the best I can to kind of compare strategical ideas from both systems. But the important thing is not that you just look at this and say that, oh, we have the ultimate answers or we don't have the ultimate answers. You guys need to do these drills for yourself. So if you're interested in how Aikido really works, right, you need to run these kinds of drills. Run drills where one or both people are armed and you try classic ground grappling stuff and you try classic Aikido stuff, right? Do pins where you have someone else try to come in while you're pinning and see if you can pin and escape the other person, right? Try that from both. So do the drills for yourself, right? So we could have internet arguments all day, but you guys need to be doing these in your schools. That's how you're going to learn from this stuff. So these are a good fundamental set of drills. We ran them for 30 seconds. For the most part, that's enough, right? So a 30-second drill of just trying to escape top mount, it can be a lot, especially if you haven't done that before. It'd be a whole lot. So you know, pick how much time is appropriate. Use safe training weapons for this. Don't use live weapons, please. Certainly try to stay with softer weapons for this kind of drill where there's a lot of stabbing going on. So train it for yourself. That's what's important. I'm Christopher Hine. Thanks a lot for watching.